Back in the headlines, Florida's former governor and Senator Bob Graham with questions about Saudi involvement in 9/11, his take on the deal with Iran, and also pressing state issues. Senator Graham here with us live this morning.
I don't see how he's electable. Jeb Bush is a low-energy person.
Donald Trump's tide rolling in Alabama this week with direct aim at the candidates from Florida.
How hard is it to draw a fair congressional district map? Well, too hard for the Florida State Legislature. They gave up and went home. We will take that topic to the roundtable.
Good Sunday morning. So glad to have you with us this morning. As always, one of Florida's most respected and successful politicians may not hold office anymore, but former Governor and Senator Bob Graham does certainly hold sway in the national conversation on so many issues.
He is a respected voice on national security. He has been pushing for the FBI to reveal information about a Saudi family that lived on Florida's west coast and had close contact with some 9/11 hijackers. Senator Graham co-chaired that 2002 joint congressional inquiry into the attacks and the hijackers. 28 pages of that report remain classified. There is a renewed call to make that public and that information public, and questions about whether it implicates the Saudi government as a supporter in the attacks.
And Senator Graham is here with us this morning to talk about that and so many other serious national and state issues. So nice to have you here this morning. Thanks so much.
Great to have you here, Senator Graham. Let's begin with sort of, I think, the issue of the moment and for some moments to come, and that is the Iran nuclear deal. If you were still a member of the Senate, would you vote for it or against it?
I would probably vote for it. It seems to me that of the options that we have, which are this deal, an attempt to resurrect the status quo before this deal, or warfare, I think this is the best alternative. The problem is the devil's in the details. I have been thinking back to the experience in 2002 before the vote on the authorization to go to war with Iraq.
Which you voted against. You were one of a handful of members of Congress who did.
Yeah, at the beginning, almost everybody was prepared to vote for authorization, but as I learned more and more about it, and as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee had access to all of the classified information, I became much more suspicious as to whether the Iraqis actually had any weapons of mass destruction, and what the consequences would be of a U.S. land invasion. So I voted no. My daughter, who was recently elected to Congress, is going through the same process now. She just returned from about a week in Israel to get that perspective, and she's meeting with a broad array of people to be as well informed as possible.
You were talking, obviously, about your daughter, Gwen Graham, Congresswoman from Florida's, I think, 1st Congressional District, 2nd, way up in the Panhandle area, including Tallahassee. We might talk about her later, but I know Glenn has got some questions too about this.
Well, she was in Israel, and certainly the two votes that you spoke about, Senator, are so different. This is a country whose mission is to annihilate their neighbor, Israel, and I wonder how you reconcile and talk to those people, especially in South Florida, who are so adamantly fearful and against this deal for that reason.
Well, I think you listen to them, because that's a very legitimate position. We're thousands of miles away from Iran, and Iran is years away from having a weapon that could threaten the United States, but Israel lies almost under the gun of Iran, so their whole perspective on this is more intense than ours, and I think it's one that we need to listen to and understand and take into account as to whether this is in the interest of the United States and the world.
Senator Graham, this week the Associated Press reported that there is a secret side deal between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Iranians that at their nuclear site, I believe it's pronounced Parchin, I'm not sure, but this is the scientific site in Iran where most of the work has been done on trying to create fissionable material for a nuclear weapon. And according to the AP report, Iran, if there were an allegation of a violation of the deal, Iran itself would inspect whatever is going on at Parchin. Now, how in the world is that acceptable?
Well, first, as you say, this is classified information. and that's a whole nother subject that maybe we'll talk about. I think we way overclassify materials and keep them from the American public when it has a right to know. If that is in fact the case, and that's the kind of thing I think my daughter would be very concerned about, and it might affect her assessment as to which is the best course for America and Iran.
Right. Well, the White House was sort of non-committal. They didn't say, yes, the deal exists or it doesn't. So we have much to learn about this. But as you say, and you were the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I mean, they stamped secret on confidential on just a lot of material.
Yeah, and a lot of it, frankly, is where there is a reason to want to keep it from the American public that does not have to do with national security, but has to do with embarrassment, with mistakes that the agency has made, and this is the way to keep it out of the spotlight.
Senator, there are 3 or 4 Americans actually being held in Iran right now. Should they have been part of this deal? Should their release have been part of this deal?
Well, the answer, I think, is no, in the sense that this deal was intended to be focused solely on Iran's aspiration to become a nuclear power. This fell outside of that circle. I certainly think, however, that the next time we sit down with the Iranians, we'll have a different set of concerns, and one high on that list would be those 4 Americans who have been held, one of whom is from family here in Broward County.
Yes.
Right. Various members of the House and Senate have been weighing in publicly over the last week or two, and one of them is somebody whom you know well, Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. He announced this week he was going to vote against it. We have a soundbite, I believe, with Senator Menendez. Let's hear what he had to say.
Why does Iran, which has the world's 4th largest proven oil reserves with 157 billion barrels of crude oil, and the world's 2nd largest proven natural gas reserves with 1,193 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, need nuclear power for domestic energy? We know that despite the fact that Iran claims their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, that they have violated the international will, as expressed by various UN Security Council resolutions, and by deceit, deception, and delay, advanced their program to the point of being a threshold nuclear state.
Well, a powerful argument, I think, there from Senator Menendez. How would you respond to him if you were there on the Senate floor and the president said, "Oh, Senator Graham of Florida, the floor is yours"?
First, I think it's a legitimate concern as to just what are Iran's aspirations if it is not to develop a weapon. Second, the fact is that a number of countries which have large domestic oil and gas reserves, such as the United States of America, also have significant nuclear power. And third, under the non-proliferation agreement, while countries other than those which already had nuclear weapons at the time the treaty was written are precluded from having military use of nuclear, they are allowed, and in some cases even encouraged, to develop their non-nuclear non-military nuclear capabilities.
Doesn't that get back to the argument, who is going to be checking for that if in the IAEA is saying that it's going to be Iran governing itself, checking itself?
Yeah, I think verification is one of the central themes of this deal, and if the verification has been compromised, particularly compromised in a document that is not available to most of the people in the world, that is another serious issue that I know my daughter is looking at.
Sure. Senator, the White House is saying, as they're counting votes in Congress, that they do have the votes to override a veto if, in fact, Congress vetoes the Iranian deal. And yet, is this not one of those issues where the country should ideally speak almost with one voice? I mean, we don't really want the president to have to veto a huge major policy decision like this.
Well, the answer is, of course, yes, and it's not just this item. The big domestic issue.
Immigration.
Well, immigration, but I'm thinking also of Obamacare,
oh, yes.
which passed almost exclusively on a one-party vote. That is not a good political position for the United States to be in. Our history has been that on these major decisions, war and peace especially, but also major domestic issues, that we tried to find a consensus, because it's not just a matter of passing it, it's a matter of then implementing it over a long period of time. And this treaty has some of those same implications. It's not just a matter of endorsing the treaty, it's then going to be a matter of monitoring it, and following and possibly modifying it as we learn more and as time moves on.
Sounds like it comes down to right now the undecided Democrats.
Yes, and I think they are a small handful, and they are getting a lot of attention. My daughter has spent several afternoons at the White House.
Yeah, I bet. All right, well, we want to come back, talk with you about the failure of the legislature to come to an agreement on congressional district lines and a lot of other things with Senator Bob Graham, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
We are back with Senator Bob Graham live in studio with us. So happy to have you here and appreciate you coming. You know, in the headlines again, largely because I think of an April New York Times article and the federal inquiry in New York into the World Trade Center bombings, is your push to have 28 pages of classified information out of the 2002 inquiry into those attacks that you helped co-author, co-chair. There is question now whether the Saudi government can be implicated in supporting those attacks. Is there information in those 28 pages that speaks to that? What do you know and what can you say?
Well, I know a lot because I was involved in writing those 28 pages, but I am restricted because they're classified in what I can talk about. What I can say and what has been said publicly is that those 28 pages primarily deal with the topic of who paid for 9/11, who is the financier, and it points a strong finger at Saudi Arabia. The American people, particularly now after 13 years after the event, have the right to know what the American government knows about an event that has reshaped our lives. There are also some practical factors in terms of withholding this information. One of those is there are several thousand American families, the families of the men and women, sons and daughters who were killed at 9/11, who have been litigating, claiming that Saudi Arabia was a co-conspirator, and they have been thrown out of court because they say you don't have enough evidence to get through the front door. Well, the reason they don't have enough evidence is because the evidence that exists is being withheld from them and the rest of the American people.
Well, bring us up to date on the lawsuit that you and Florida Bulldog, this investigative group of journalists, and excellent they are, about the Saudi family that was living near Sarasota that, just a few days before the 9/11 attacks, left so abruptly. They left food on the table of their home, and they had been visited by, 2 or 3 of the hijackers?
Including Mohammed Atta, the leader of the 19. Right. That's a situation which just came to light in about 2011. And since that time, there's been an effort to get more information. The FBI's first response was, we don't have any information, and therefore there's nothing to comply with. Subsequently, after the court took a hardline position, they have produced 80,000 pages of information, which now sit in Fort Lauderdale in a federal courthouse, and the judge will be making a judgment as to what of those 80,000 pages will be made available.
So we can expect Judge Williams Locke at some point, we hope soon, to say here's what can be released and here is what has to be redacted, but at least a decision.
Yes, and I think that will be another, like the 28 pages, spotlight on what happened before and after 9/11.
You know, this is like reading a spy novel. I mean, what are the implications if those 28 pages of information are released? I mean, might that constitute an act of war by a friendly government?
Well, here's what I think is happening. I believe that Saudi Arabia knows what they did. Saudi Arabia knows that at least at the highest levels in the United States government, we know what they did, and they observe that our response has been passivity. If a country is a co-conspirator in something as violent as 9/11 and we don't have any response, that sends to the Saudis, in my judgment, a message of impunity. They can do anything they want to, and they have been doing that. They've been arming militarily, financially, and with a constant flow of new recruits who have been trained at madrasas and mosques in jihad and violence. And we're paying a heavy, heavy price for that action of withholding information.
You used the word passivity, but then then President Bush ordered that secrecy, and President Obama issued another executive order keeping the secrecy intact. Yeah. That's more than passive.
Well, the response of the United States to Saudi involvement has been passive. Have we had any sanction against Saudi Arabia? Have we stopped supplying them massive amounts of military equipment? Have we attempted to have some oversight of their financial systems? No, no, no. That's the passivity that the Saudis are responding to, and they're responding by continuing to do today and assumedly in the future what they've done in the past, which is to provide the two essential ingredients of a terrorist organization: money and recruits.
Senator Graham, I don't want time to run out here before we get you to kind of weigh in on this unbelievable presidential race. Here we are 16 months away from the election or even a primary, and you know, Donald Trump attracts 30,000 people to a rally in Mobile, Alabama, and rather than being a passing phenomenon, it looks like he is in this to stay and wants to win it. Well, how do you explain this?
Well, I think the most important question is why is Donald Trump getting the level of support that he is? I think there are a number of reasons. One of which is we stopped teaching civics in the United States in 1970. We now had 2.5 generations of Americans who have grown up with no formal introduction to what it means to be a citizen of democracy. And I think that breeds the kind of indifference, even anger towards
and
our
even
governmental institutions.
Contempt for government and politicians.
And I think also there are a lot of people who are struggling and who don't see government as being their ally in trying to make the American dream of constant opportunity really available to them. And I believe that Donald Trump has tapped into that feeling. I think that Hillary Clinton, some of the low ratings that she's been getting have been a result of that same attitude of contempt.
But, I mean, here you're classically, obviously, a Democrat. You have been all your life. But it looks, frankly, like Hillary Clinton has just run a really lackluster campaign, and she has never taken responsibility for having a private email account when she was Secretary of State.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the strategy or the policy that is serving her at all well. I think she's got to be more open, try to get this email server thing behind her so that it isn't the first question asked in every press interview, and to begin to talk to the American people about the things that they're really concerned about. And I believe this stagnation of opportunity is at the top of the list.
You were with Rand Paul in June at a town hall meeting, and somebody got up and asked whether you'd consider running for president. Can we go there?
No, I did that once, and it was a wonderful experience, but I am enjoying life now, overdosing on 11 grandchildren, and presidency is not in my playbook.
Well, we are so glad that you came in this morning, Senator. We wish you well. You look great. You and your partner, Adele, one of the most outstanding women I know.
You have
Wish you
very
the
good
best.
judgment, Michael.
Well, you had good judgment. How many years ago? How long have you been married?
56. Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
Well, congratulations on that. Thanks very much.
Thanks. When we come back, so how hard is it to draw similar, fair, same-size shapes? Florida lawmakers couldn't do it, and that is just one of the topics we take to the roundtable, and that's next.
Once again, Florida lawmakers spend time and taxpayers' money working in Tallahassee for the last 2 weeks on an important question. New congressional districts, unfortunately, they came up empty.
The aborted redistricting effort is the first topic we take to the roundtable. But first, some introductions. Nancy Ankrum is a roundtable regular. She is editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. And welcome back to Katie Sorensen, creator and force behind the Good Government Initiative at the University of Miami. Katie's also a former Miami-Dade County Commissioner. And Ed Pozzoli is president of the Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale and an active and influential player in state Republican Party politics. Good morning, everyone.
Great to have you. Buckle on your seats where, you know, your safety belts. We're going to get going here.
Most people don't know the seats roll here.
Ed Pozzoli, you are, I think, a very keen observer of Tallahassee. What the heck happened up there? They go up there for 2 weeks and they try to agree on congressional district maps that will meet the requirements of the state Supreme Court, and they can't do it.
Yeah, well, they didn't come up empty, except that they came up with two options, one House and one Senate, which is now going to go before Judge Lewis, a trial judge up in Tallahassee, who is then going to look at these maps, as well as the plaintiffs in the case, some of the legal women voters and some of those folks, who also will present some maps, and then decide. And then ultimately he'll make a decision, which will ultimately go back up to the Florida Supreme Court for review.
But you know, the governor could have had them go back. And this legislature can't get anything right. This is the third try. They couldn't get Medicaid reform, they couldn't do a budget, and now they can't do redistricting. And there's something just fundamentally wrong about, and one party controls it, by the way, remember? One party, and they can't get it right. It's just...
And it's a waste of our money, it's a waste of our goodwill. You know, earlier this year, the Supreme Court did uphold Arizona's independent commission that draws the lines in that state. And our editorial called for a similar, now I know we were just kind of whistling Dixie here, but...
Can you still do that?
No, I can, but I won't here. For a similar commission, an independent, disinterested commission to just get it right and get it done.
Yeah, independent is independent. And that's the toughest part about it. There's no such thing as independent commission.
But there really isn't a tough part about this, though. There's something in the Washington Post. I want to put up this beautiful visual graphic of how somebody can, you know, we're talking about this, we have a very engaged audience here, but most people hear redistricting and think, oh, I don't know what that is. Just take a look at this graphic. On the left, let's say you have 2-to-1 in a district, blue to red. The next three, the first one is the blue team drawing what looks to be fair and equitable, but it's really not because now red has no representation. Then move one over to the right, and then here's a fair and equitable where it really comes out right. And then the last one is gerrymandered. And Ed, you just told me that you represented the Senate in 2002 in this case and won. What is the difference here?
Well, the difference, there's a couple of things that people need to understand. It's nice to put up a graphic and say, but people haven't populated Florida evenly across the board. So you can't draw squares and evenly populate. So there's some requirements that I think people need to know. Each congressional district needs to be exactly the same number of people. And then there's a conflict between what the federal law says that we need to provide certain minority access districts. In other words, African American candidates, communities, Hispanic communities need to be able to elect somebody who looks like them under federal law. But on the other hand, Florida passed a Florida Constitution that says you can't either favor or disfavor an incumbent when drawing these districts. That's almost impossible. And so what you have now is you have a little bit of a disagreement between the House and Senate about how to make that happen. The Supreme Court provided, Florida Supreme Court provided some level of guidance, but the result may be that Corrine Brown's district, which is a minority access district,
She's
which is
from
the
Jacksonville,
which is the
let's point
poster
out,
child for gerrymandering, right? Because it looks like a big snake going down the snake. But in order to comply with federal law, that district was originally drafted by a federal judge and now massaged a little bit in the last redistricting, but it doesn't look like gerrymandering. It doesn't represent anything like your graphs showed, but it was in compliance with federal law.
But to get back to the point about getting a fair district, a bipartisan commission, okay, so you have 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans do it, you can come up with something. Computers can do amazing things, and if you have people on both sides doing the drawing, there is something that could be independent and thoughtful. And 6 states have done it now.
I quite agree. And I think that if people at home are saying redistricting, what's it really mean? Nancy, I think that if people at home say, I hate dysfunctional government in Washington because you've got all these members, especially of the House, who can take a hard position, you know, on immigration or anything else, because they will not pay they will pay a price if they compromise, and they don't have to compromise.
Absolutely.
And that goes back to district lines. If you draw a district, I mean, just to give you one example, Carlos Curbello's 27th congressional seat is what? It's almost evenly, slightly more Democratic registration, but he responds in a way, I happen to think, for a freshman congressman, he understands what's at stake there. And it's unlike other districts where they're so safe that members of Congress just take a hard stand and say, I'm not going to compromise.
Because they're safe, because they know that they are really not going anywhere. You know, and my concern is that this same dysfunctional state legislature, those lawmakers that are not term limited, I suspect they'll be returned to office despite the dysfunction that we're seeing in Tallahassee.
Right.
I think we need to talk about the race this weekend, the presidential race.
Okay.
I mean, we must.
Yes, we must.
And clearly the headline so far is Donald Trump in Alabama and, what, 30,000 people who came to see him. And he took direct aim at Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, who the Florida men. And Ed, I mean, what is happening there?
Nothing. I mean,
No,
look,
not nothing. Nothing is not. Nothing is not.
I'll tell you why. Because you got to put this in the right context. 8 years ago, Rudy Giuliani was at 45% of the Republican primary vote, and ultimately he faded. 4 years ago, Herman Cain, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, Michelle Bachmann all took turns at the top of the polls. This is the summertime before. Donald Trump is a unique candidate, and he is tapping into certain dissatisfaction about government. I think he is. But when Republicans look at 2 things, they look at issues. He's not a conservative Republican at all. And 2, his temperament. They have to ask themselves a very big question. Do they want this person with this kind of temper, because he is what he is, in the White House? That's going to be a big question. We'll see.
But I think what he's tapping into are some really ugly things. I mean, he's tapping into everyone's sense, or not everyone's sense, but his supporter sense of racism. He's scapegoating people, scapegoating immigrants. Immigration is his signature issue, and the main message is everybody just go home and don't come here, which is very ugly. And also this whole thing about, I've heard so many people say, well, we like that he's not politically correct. What does that mean? He's boorish and rude. He says offensive things. He couldn't possibly negotiate anything in a positive way on a world stage or even with members of Congress.
Well, he conflates political correctness, which is perhaps not wanting to offend. He conflates that with hostile, vile language. And it's working.
Do we have time? I know we're pretty short in this segment, but do we have time to play Jeb Bush, who found himself talking about using the word anchor babies? This was fascinating. Let's listen.
Yeah.
Are you aware that the term anchor baby, that's an offensive term? People find that hurtful.
You mean it's not politically correct and yet everybody uses it? I'll use the word anchor baby. Excuse me. I'll use the word anchor baby.
Do you regret using the term anchor babies yesterday on the radio?
No, I didn't. I don't regret it.
You don't regret it?
No, do you have a better term?
I'm not. I'm asking you.
Okay.
A lot of folks
you give me a better term and I'll use it. I'm serious.
All right.
Don't yell at me behind my ear though.
I mean, he's supposed to be the adult in a room. I mean, to me, this indicates maybe Donald Trump is driving the conversation.
Oh, he is driving the conversation because you'll notice that there has been tepid pushback from the other candidates because they don't want to offend his base either. Everyone's betting that he eventually is going to fall from the stage.
But, you know, we're going to take a break in just 10 seconds here, but I will say that Marco Rubio did push back a little bit and say, I believe in birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment, and Trump, that's one of the many, in my view, ugly things that he has advocated. All right, stay with us. We have more of this fabulous roundtable in just a minute. Welcome back live in our studio this morning, our Powerhouse Roundtable. And let's talk for a minute about Hillary Clinton, because Katie, as I told or I commented to Senator Graham, I think that her campaign in overall has been fairly lackluster. And her latest poll numbers show that her favorability rating has slipped and her standing has slipped. Let's put these poll numbers from the Quinnipiac University poll up on the board. It's Hillary versus Trump in Florida. I find these kind of silly comparisons, but Hillary would lose to Trump and Biden would beat Trump. I mean, for goodness sake, Biden hasn't even said that he's running, although he's supposedly thinking about it. But largely, Katie, going back to Hillary Clinton, why can't she get this server issue behind her?
Well, this issue started in March, and I remember feeling pretty bad when it came out and thinking that this is not going to go away. And she has to put this behind her somehow. But with independent investigations going on, if the FBI is investigating, I don't know if she can be the one to put it behind her. But she has to come clean as much as she possibly can right now.
We continue to see the imperious Hillary. I think Hillary is probably very good, very warm, one-on-one with her small, intimate groups, but she still doesn't engage the media, and she comes off as, I'm above this, I have already given my explanation, and this is, and that's that. But that's not that.
And this weekend, she made a couple of attempts to make some jokes about that and probably trying to switch tacks, but that seemed to fall flat.
Yeah, look, she's not, look, let's call it what it is. She is not Bill Clinton. She cannot tell a story. She cannot sell a story. She cannot get herself out of this. And now Katie's right, that with the FBI involved, the timetable is now out of her control. And this is not the FBI, it's the Justice Department. It's the Obama administration's Justice Department who is now looking at this in a serious, serious way. And so there is a lot more that we need to learn as to whether or not this derails her candidacy. But this is a much bigger story than even what's going on in the folly of the Republican side. This is a serious story about someone who was to be anointed the nominee and who is now likely not to be.
It certainly does have legs. You know, while we're on this, just very briefly, I have to say that one of the big surprises among several surprises in this race is Bernie Sanders, a 73-year-old socialist from Vermont, an avowed socialist, is the darling of the American left and some other people as well. How did that come to be?
Well, I think he is the Trump of the left.
Right.
And he's talking the talk.
That's a tweet right there.
Yeah, right. And he's talking the talk and walking the walk of people on the left who are purists, people who haven't heard that kind of language well, you know, Obama doesn't speak it, Biden doesn't speak it, Hillary doesn't speak it, because they all have to navigate this middle line.
But, you know, I think the African-American community is going to be much more behind Hillary than they're going to be behind Bernie Sanders, and that she has a strong record of support for the African-American community, of a sense of fairness and justice that I don't think he really has, especially representing the state that he represents, which is really
I'm
white.
not quite sure. There's a new generation. I think there's going to be a generation of African-Americans who, yes, they're going to vote for Hillary. I think Hillary cannot assume that she is going to draw in a younger generation of African-Americans who were maybe teenagers when in 2008.
Or younger women as a whole.
Absolutely.
Who are going to say, our first American woman president. I think that there's some young women who are going to say, well, that's great, but I don't think it's going to be Hillary.
I find this fascinating because realistically, Debbie Wasserman Schultz couldn't identify the difference between what socialism was and today's Democratic Party was. And so she couldn't articulate the difference between the two, and that's why you're seeing Sanders gaining support, because he is a viable candidate inside of today's Democratic Party. Socialist or not, he is a viable candidate inside of today's Democratic Party.
Controlling the means and distribution of production, isn't that sort of the short-term?
There is an answer.
I mean, if there is an answer, I think basically that's it. And I don't think, let's move on if we can to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because on this Iran nuclear deal, she is in a real quandary. She has a very high Jewish population in her congressional district. She is the chair of the Democratic National Committee. She is a friend of the president. And she hasn't said what she's going to do.
All eyes are on Debbie, and all ears are waiting to hear where she comes down on this issue. She is in a pickle. She is in a pickle.
I think so too, but I think Representative Nadler gave her some wiggle room this week because he is a very thoughtful member of Congress. Has been there since 1994. Cares deeply about these issues, was finally lobbied by the president, but I don't think that's what persuaded him. I think he certainly, this is an example of political courage because he has a district that's very Zionist.
I don't know if it's political courage. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think Chuck Schumer showed political courage by being against it. Joe Lieberman has been outspoken against it. It's not just Republicans who are against this deal, and there's a reason. That side deal you talked about with Senator Graham, he paused for thought on that because verification or trust but verified, the old Reagan mantra with the Russians, that's nowhere to be seen. This is now the opposite of that. We're going to rely on Iran to tell us whether they're complying or not.
Well, but what's the alternative? What's the alternative?
The alternative is there's a false premise that if we don't sign the agreement, that means war. That's a false premise. There needs to be several third and fourth and fifth alternatives.
But the scientists seem to say Iran is within a year, maybe less, of creating a bomb. And I just think that the Obama administration and the world at large has said Iran must not have a bomb.
But Iran desperately wants the sanctions to be lifted because they want our money to flow into Iran. And what will it be used for? Iran is the #1 propagator of evil in that area in the Middle East. I mean, really, does anybody really believe that that money is going to be used wisely or used not against us? Why are we lifting our economic sanctions, providing them dollars so that they can use those dollars against us?
That was Senator Schumer's argument, and I think it's a powerful argument. We'll see what happens. Anyway, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
Thank you so
Nancy,
much.
Katie, Ed. Great. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right, in South Florida, often the weather is the news, and this weekend we're watching Tropical Storm Danny. You'll notice I didn't say Hurricane Danny, thank goodness. We will have a quick check on its development and direction when we come back. Here is a live look from our Fort Lauderdale camera. Looks a little overcast.
Yeah, that's today's news, and we have Tropical Storm Danny to find out about as well. So let's turn it over to Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with all the details.
But anyways, okay, I'm sorry about that. I hope you saw that it's still tropical storm. Here's the forecasted track as we head into Tuesday, downgrading to a depression and then a leftover remnant just looks like on the northern edge of Cuba. So we've seen a little bit of a change there with the track. The forecast cone has pushed a little to the south. I do want to say there is a tropical storm watch now extending into Puerto Rico, Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands as well. Here's a visible image of what it looks like for Danny. Not too good. Look at that wind shear tearing it apart. You can actually see at the surface right there. There's that center, but take a look at those higher clouds. It just looks overcast. It's definitely weakening. And then we have this tropical wave kicking up speed. That's because the Bermuda High is building and expanding, and this is sweeping the low towards the west, just right behind Danny. Similar track, right, compared to Danny? Well, still a disturbance, but I will say this. We will be talking about a tropical depression sometime before we reach the middle of the week. Here's a live look out of Miami's tower cam. Looks absolutely gorgeous. No rain on the radar, but we still have the chance for some storms building this afternoon as we continue with that northeast flow around that high situated over the northern Gulf of Mexico. Here's a look at the in-house model so you can see a couple of these showers popping up even in the east metro areas, but pulling away towards the south and west. And the Keys will be getting some heavy downpours, even southern portions of Miami-Dade as we head into the late afternoon and the early evening hours. Tomorrow's back to school, possible morning showers. That is a definite, but then in the afternoon, drying out, only a 20% chance for a storm. And we stay stable for Tuesday once again. Can't rule out an isolated thunderstorm. More rain comes back by the middle part of the week. Michael?
Jennifer, thanks very much. All right, still to come, my personal perspective about a political dispute that has turned very personal. I will explain coming up. Before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about a political difference of opinion that turned into a personal attack on me by Miami Beach Commissioner Jonah Wolfson. He and his Political Action Committee ran this full-page ad in the Herald twice this week calling me sleazy, unethical journalist. Now, he can say whatever he wants, of course. He's entitled to his own opinion, as they say, but not to his own facts. Here are the facts. Commissioner Wolfson has been strong-arming city vendors, developers, lobbyists, business owners for the last few months to donate to his Political Action Committee, which is called Relentless for Progress, same initials as Request for Proposal, the term government uses to solicit business. Wolfson has raked in over $1 million. The commissioner is doing this despite a Miami Beach ordinance that specifically prohibits giving money to commission or mayoral candidates directly or indirectly, and the money for this PAC will reportedly go to help 3 commission candidates. On this program and in a Herald op-ed piece I wrote, I called all of this sleazy, stinky, didn't pass the smell test. It absolutely does not. In response, Commissioner Wolfson took out this full-page ad calling me sleazy and unethical. He also says I've heard his fundraising efforts. Oh, I certainly hope I did. The Miami Beach City Attorney issued an opinion saying the Commissioner's PAC somehow doesn't violate the law, perhaps, but it's still wrong, unethical, and it stinks. I invited Commissioner Wolfson to come on our show today, look me in the eye, look you in the eye, defend what he has done, sit here and say in person what he said in his Herald ad. Well, he said he would come, but only if I apologize to him first on the air. That's not going to happen. I have nothing to apologize for. The fact that the husband of my friend and colleague Lena Milberg works for Mount Sinai Medical Center, I never disclose that because it's irrelevant. I've never discussed Wolfson and his PAC with either of them. Wolfson also says I should have called him before I wrote or said anything about him and his Political Action Committee. Wrong again. I had all the facts I needed to reach my opinion. Commissioner Wolfson could have made a case for himself today here on Channel 10 at no cost. He chose not to. Not very courageous, I would say. Commissioner Wolfson reminds me of those schoolyard bullies from our childhood, the guys who would take lunch money from the smaller kids. Commissioner Wolfson isn't going to get my lunch money or yours. And if there's more to report about Relentless for Progress, I will. That's my perspective. Hope you have a great Sunday. Stay informed. Get involved.
Have a beautiful day.